Look how cute this is. The program reads right to left like a manga. Look at this. Look at this. That's clever. Oh my god, hey, welcome back to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. My name is Mickey Jo and I'm obsessed with all things theatre. I'm a professional theatre critic here in the UK and recently I was invited to go and see Death Note, the musical, in concert at the London Palladium in the West End. And while the speed at which this concert series sold out had already made it clear that this was a cultural phenomenon, I had no idea just quite how popular this was, because the number of messages I have had from people, even since just posting a picture of me outside of this show saying, I didn't know this was a thing and I'm obsessed with it. So today, I'm going to be telling you all about Death Note, the musical. That's backwards. Excuse me, 'cause manga. Death Note, the musical, in concert at the London Palladium. What did I think of this story? What are the songs like? Does this work as a musical? What did I think of this particular concert staging of it? How were the performances? And do I think this show has a future ahead of it? Lots to talk about in today's new review. So if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for many more reviews coming very soon about all of your other favourite shows. And if you want to see early and exclusive content, you can hit the link in the description and sign up to become one of my channel members. Also, if you went to see Death Note in concert at the London Palladium, or if you've seen a version of this show before, let us know what you thought in the comment section down below. And let us know, are you here because you're a Death Note fan who wants to know more about the musical, or are you a musical theatre fan who wants to know more about Death Note? Or are you a fan of both things and this is like all your prayers have been answered? For now, right before I start telling you about Death Note the musical in concert, check out this footage of the curtain call. So what exactly is Death Note? Well, it was a 2003 Japanese manga that has gone on to be adapted for anime, as well as for a live-action television series, and now a musical, which has already been produced multiple times in Japan. The series was originally written by Tsugumi Oba and illustrated by Takeshi Obata. The story is set within the Kanto region of Japan, just like Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow were, and it tells the story of a high school student named Light, who is the son of a police officer and has a very black and white view of morality and the ideas around crime and punishment. As it happens, he gets the opportunity to exact his particular interpretation of justice on wrongdoers and criminals when he stumbles across something called a Death Note. This is a book that has been dropped down to earth by a Shinigami named Ryuk. Shinigami are mythological creatures within Japanese culture. The live-action Netflix version of Death Note refers to them as death gods, so that's one interpretation of how you could view these things. And Ryuk, the Shinigami, has become bored with his daily routine. We've all been there. So he drops down to earth this book that has the capabilities of killing people whose name and face are known to you. All you need to do is write their name in the book. Specifying a cause of death is optional, and within 40 seconds, they die. Light, who is initially skeptical about the book's instructions, quickly comes to realize that the thing actually works, and then begins about killing a bunch of people who he thinks deserve death. Largely criminals who ought to have been convicted, but whose victims have been failed by a corrupt and fallible justice system. However, this string of unexplained deaths does not go unnoticed, and pretty soon there is a task force dedicated to finding the one who is being called Kira. This is what his followers are calling him, the one who is exacting justice on all these criminals. In order to apprehend him, the police consult a mysterious detective simply known as L, who is this enigmatic, bizarre genius who makes it his mission to hunt down and stop Kira. Light, meanwhile, is unable to dispense with L because his name is not known to him. We also, meanwhile, have a pop star named Misa Misa who becomes obsessed with Kira and helping him because he avenged her parents who were murdered during her childhood. And everything sort of ensues from there. Now, Death Note was not known to me before I went to see this show. I've read some manga in my time, I've watched some anime in my time. In fact, I think the only thing I knew about Death Note was the basic premise of what it was about, and also the spiky-haired gentleman. I was familiar with his work. But I thought it was a really compelling story. Much like a previous musical that also features a score by Frank Wildhorn, Jekyll and Hyde, it deals with a lot of philosophical and moral questions. It's naturally tense and suspenseful and dramatic. I like the sort of mythological fantasy element. I like the darkness of it all. I think it's very much unlike a lot of other shows that we already have on stage. There's definitely a freshness and a uniqueness to it, which I think is important. But does the show actually work as a musical? Let's discuss. So it's been adapted for the stage with a score by Frank Wildhorn and lyrics by Jack Murphy. Frank Wildhorn is a composer whose work you may associate with Jekyll and Hyde, with Wonderland, with Bonnie and Clyde. All of them classic stories from different eras with shades of darkness and romance. Wildhorn, who has also been a pop writer, delivers nothing better than an exceptional power ballad. Some of the best songs that he's written have been things like In His Eyes from Jekyll and Hyde, Dying Ain't So Bad from Bonnie and Clyde, Finding Wonderland, This Is the Moment, Someone Like You, so many great belters of songs. It often has this angsty and epic quality, and the score for Death Note, I would say, is much the same. There's a few really compelling songs in there. There's a little variety. Misa Misa gets a bit of a Japanese pop moment with a little bit of a rap section, but for the most part we also get a lot of epic power ballads. Dare I say too many? I think some of his other scores balance those really epic and stirring moments a little better. In Jekyll and Hyde you have the few big moments. With this one, it did start to feel like ballad after ballad after ballad. We had a lot of solos where we just had these individual characters singing these outpourings of emotion, and it starts to feel just a little bit unearned when everyone is being so declarative and everything is epic and everything is grand. Suddenly it doesn't quite have the impact because everything is up there, so it's not like we get this emotional climax of the show so much as it keeps staying at that one very intense level. It made me crave for more songs that were shared between multiple characters. You know, you had this sort of a chorus echoing the morality of the thing, much like in Jekyll and Hyde with songs like Murder, Murder and Facade, or Made in America that opens the second act with Bonnie and Clyde, that does a similar thing. But my favourite songs in the score, Hurricane, I thought was a really great song, a really strong emergence for Light as our protagonist, and a really great hook, which Frank Wildhorn is always going to deliver to you. Frank Wildhorn writes a great hook. There's a song in this score called Secrets and Lies. The song can stay exactly the same, but please may it change its name because there are now 3 different musicals that feature songs called exactly Secrets and Lies. Although I guess this might have been first. Maybe Diana needs to change theirs. I think what's meant to be the emotional ballad high point of the show is a song called When Love Comes, and this was a great song, brilliantly performed, and were it not so crowded amongst other epic power ballads, I think it would have stood out just a little bit more. There's a song that Elle and Light sang, this sort of a playful confrontation number while they were playing a tennis match. Looking at the structure of the show, I want to say it was playing his game. It was somewhere in the middle of the second act, but that, I think, was my favourite number of the show, just because it was a little different in the way that the story was being musicalised. It wasn't someone stopping completely in their tracks to sing about something we already know, which is something that started to happen a lot in the second act. The one song I would excise or move completely is a ballad that Misa Misa sings. It's her new single. We see her recording it and then performing it on stage, and really she's using it to speak out to Kira and try and connect with him. She's singing about how much she loves him and how she wants to try and find him. I think we should hear this, if it's to be included at all, in the first act, because it's going to set up the choice that she's going to make at the beginning of the second. But to have her do what she does at the start of the second act and then sing this song later, it's just stuff that we already know. And it kind of gives him an inkling that Misa Misa might be the one that he is searching for, but it comes amongst a lot of songs that stop the action cold just to riff on one emotion rather than progressing the plot with their lyrics. And that's something that would be helpful to the show, I think, because of the book by Ivan Menchel. Ivan also collaborated with Frank Wildhorn on Bonnie and Clyde, and I really enjoy the ideas that he articulates with this script when he has the time to. The trouble is there is a lot of plot for us to get to. There is a lot of exposition and culture and folklore. There are complex rules that we desperately need to be able to understand about things that the Shinigami can and cannot do when interfering with the human world that will set up big plot twists that are going to come in the second act. It's all very cerebral, and there's a lot of plotting and manipulation and machinations going on, especially as we approach the end of the show. And I feel like Ivan Menchel has written this script under the weight of all of those obligations and responsibilities. There is so much that he has to get across that he doesn't particularly have time to develop it with much flair or much character. The one person who is really interesting is Elle. This is a character that is set up in a really interesting way. They are talked about before they appear. They get this great entrance. It's full of drama and intrigue. We come to learn just enough about this character that keeps them intriguing and fascinating, but they end up being much more likable to us really than Light as a protagonist, who, though he starts in the sort of moral absolute, ends up acting purely in his own self-interest and doesn't really have the time to talk about it or sing about it, like a Jekyll and Hyde character who constantly reflects on the path that he's gone down and his own morality. Light doesn't do an awful lot of self-reflecting. He just talks about the task at hand constantly, and he's not super likable for that. I think structurally there are a few ways this show could be improved. I think the way that it opens, it just sort of begins. There's not much grandeur to its commencement, but as soon as we have the reveal of the Death Note, and especially after we have Ryuk coming down and sort of lingering around Light, that's where it gets really great. Ryuk as a character is really terrific. He injects an awful lot of mystery and comedy into the show because he's hilarious while also being bizarre and eerie. But it is a piece, because of its dark, brooding themes, that longs for a levity, and he does a great job of providing that. I want more Ryuk in this show, honestly, and if there is going to be a narrator about sort of the downfall of Light's morality and what's going on, I think Ryuk could get more involved vocally as an observer to what's happening here. That's why he's come down, and that's why he's lingering around all of this after all, so that he can watch and be entertained by it. I just wish he was less of a silent observer. Get involved, Ryuk. Would it make more sense if the whole thing were to open with the Shinigami and the dropping of the Death Note, rather than that coming as one of the early scenes but not the first thing we see? I don't know. There's a possibility. I'm aware, having looked at the plot synopsis of the original manga and the stage version, that it's been streamlined somewhat, and I think that is for the best. Like I said, there's an awful lot of material and an awful lot of story that they have to get through, so I think they've made smart choices in retaining the bulk of the thing, but crafting a satisfying theatrical narrative out of it. The one enduring gripe that I have, and it's not really with the adaptation, it's I guess with the original source material, is the female characters. So we have Misa Misa, the pop star, and another Shinigami called Rem. But without spoiling too many of the plot twists that unfold, and fans of Death Note, please don't hate me for this one, I don't think that these are well-written female characters. I know we have the whole Batman-like my parents were killed in childhood backstory for Misa Misa, but in terms of their actions, we have these female characters who commit themselves to the servitude of, if not men, then whoever it is that they develop a love for and a sort of an obsession with, and they just make these selfless and sacrificial choices, while the men who really aren't whatsoever emotionally invested in their lives or their existences and are willing to just let this happen, they meanwhile are hyper-intellectual and cerebral and adversarial, and they're all about winning and competing and who can come out on top. The men get to be competitive, powerful masterminds, while the women sacrifice themselves for their benefit. This is a spoiler for something that happens in the second act of the show. If you don't want spoilers, skip to the next section here. But Misa Misa, very early in the second act of this show, decides that in order to be given the gift of Shinigami eyes, something that she thinks will allow her to be able to help Light on his mission, and she's obsessed with him at this point. She doesn't know it's Light, she's calling him Kira. She agrees to sacrifice half of her lifespan without knowing how many years that actually is. She literally gives up half of her life on the off chance that this will make the guy she's obsessed with like her more. He, meanwhile, is pretty happy that she's done that. He manipulates her, he uses her, he doesn't really care when she gets arrested. She's just another pawn in his plans. The whole thing is just inherently misogynistic and needlessly dismissive of these female characters for me. I don't enjoy that. The final part of Light's scheme hinges on playing on the emotions of the Shinigami Ren. He knows that she is going to desperately want to look after and take care of Misa Misa because of love, because of her womanly emotions, and he knows that she will sacrifice herself. Again, he doesn't care. And Ryuk, meanwhile, has a very different perspective, and he very happily kills Light at the end simply because he's bored. So we have this female Shinigami who sacrifices her immortal godlike self just to help out the pop star half of whose lifespan she's already taken away to give her magic eyes. And the male Shinigami Ryuk is like, it's been fun watching you kill people, but I'm bored of you now so you can die. Like, this is a very different presentation of these two characters. But ultimately, I do think the thing works as a musical. It's gothic like the Phantom of the Opera is, it grapples with interesting moral questions like Jekyll and Hyde does, it's dark, it's gritty, it's brilliantly suspenseful and compelling, and it's clearly already got a massive audience. But what was this particular concert like? So this concert staging has been directed and choreographed by Nick Winston, with Alexandra Sarmiento as assistant director and choreographer. Chris Marr was the musical director, Katie Richardson was the musical supervisor, Justin Williams has designed the set, and all in all, it barely has any right to call itself a concert. I say has rather than had in the present tense because after the 3 performances at the Palladium, which have now finished, it's going on to another run at the Lyric Theatre in the West End. And if that staging is to be anything like this one, which I'm given to understand that it is, it's not a concert whatsoever. We have a full set, we have full costuming, Adam Pascal looked lovely in his spiky updo, we have full lighting from Ben Cracknell, we have a full orchestra with epic orchestrations. No one was performing script in hand, there were no handheld microphones or stand, it was just, for all intents and purposes, a fully staged version of this show, which I thought was terrific. My only complaint was that they were calling it a concert. I don't know if they wanted to manage people's expectations or if that had been the original plan and the whole thing just ended up evolving to this greater level, but I thought it was great. In particular, the set design from Justin Williams I thought was just brilliant. Now, this being based on manga, which is inherently visual, I think allows for a lot of creativity and inspiration when bringing that particular aesthetic to the stage. I thought the way they used projections on the backdrop behind the stage were all really cool. I loved this black and white and grey and red colour palette. As far as the costuming goes, the costumes for the Shinigami were excellent, and the costume design was done by Kimi Nakano, but it was a really full world that they created, and it did a fantastic job of telling the story. There were moments where I think we got a little bit stuck with the staging. We spent an awful lot of time in Light's bedroom, which was off to the side on one level of this set. But I just think the fact that it was to the side and raised up, it has a lot to do with the fact that the show was repetitive in nature anyway, that we kept going back to that location, and he spends so much time staring at the TV in his room, and that's how he sort of gets updates on how everything is going by watching the news. But it started to make him feel almost sidelined and less important as a character. He's constantly away and up there and over there. If that's to be the most gripping, most important scenes of his development, it should really be happening downstage, center stage. El, meanwhile, when he's first introduced to us, is sort of awkwardly squatting on a throne that is right in the middle, and that presents him to us subconsciously, if not deliberately, as the most important character on this stage. Ryuk is also sitting in that chair when he first appears to us. Now, I will say it's a striking entrance because of the costuming, but when we meet these two Shinigami creatures for the first time, they both just walk onto the platform from 2 different directions, and they need far more status. At this point, I'm going to acknowledge that it's a concert production, and we don't really have like full blackouts for scene changes, but they need something. Like, we need like flying or like a trapdoor. They need some kind of a magical sort of an entrance. If they're to be these fantasy characters, it undermines them as well to have them just walking on. Maybe that's me, but I just don't want to see fantasy characters using stairs, because they walk on and then the scene just quietly starts between the 2 of them. It needed much more oomph for their introduction, because what happened is the audience could see them entering and applauded them anyway out of the love of these characters and the anticipation of these characters. But that same anticipation could have been converted into a huge response if they'd done something really wowing with the introduction of Ryuk and Ren. Ben Cracknell's lighting design, I loved when he washed everything in this introspective blue. I loved this eerie, mysterious green. I loved the intensity of it. He absolutely understood the gothic, melodramatic tone of this story. I do think there is the possibility for even more theatricality. Like I said before, I really loved the scene where the 2 of them were playing tennis. I loved the way that that was staged, and it was done really cleanly with the sound effects they were using as well. I had heard that at the first performance, the sound design had some issues. Now, they don't have much time to put all the technical elements together for these concerts, but that first audience is still a paying audience, so I know I would have been disappointed if there were a lot of sound problems. A few were lingering by the time I saw this on the second day for the matinee, but I didn't think it was too bad. But back to the tennis sequence. That's the same kind of cleverness and exciting staging I kind of wish Nick Winston had directed the rest of the thing with. There were a lot of points where we just had the ensemble walk into different formations and go and stand at different points on the stage, but it was all a little static. I just wanted it to have more motion. I wanted for it to feel like a crowd that someone could get lost in or swept up in. Otherwise, again, perhaps subconsciously because of the staging, Light starts to feel a little bit conspicuous as a character, and it seems inevitable that Elle is going to be able to find him and stop him, simply because he's always standing apart from crowds and looking very suspicious. The other issue I had with this is I don't think we see nearly enough deaths. In the first act, he starts to use the Death Note to kill so many people, and we never see these deaths portrayed on stage, except for one instance where Elle is using someone else on a live television broadcast as a decoy to see if Light is in a particular region, if he's in the Kanto region, and if he will use the Death Note to kill him, which he does. We see that murder happen in real time, but because this is such a big plot point, I think we would feel the weight of it more if we saw all these people getting murdered. And it doesn't have to be graphic or bloody, I just think we should see more death in the musical Death Note. Maybe the extremes of Misa's choices would make more sense if we were to see a flashback of her parents getting murdered, for example. There's a scene in which Light manipulates an FBI agent into giving him the names of all of his co-workers so that he can kill all of them as well and shut down an entire team of FBI agents who are on his trail. This is a huge turning point because this is one of the first times where he is using his power to kill someone who isn't a criminal but just to protect himself and for his own gain. I think we really ought to see those deaths to feel the weight of those simultaneous murders. Essentially, I just think every time he uses the Death Note within the show, it should be seen. But I've talked long enough about this production, let me tell you about these performances. So Light was played by Joaquin Pedro Valdes. This is the best performance I've ever seen him give. I thought he was sensational. I don't know if he fully read as a high school student, but he was sort of on par with everyone else in the cast, so I didn't mind that too much. But he was brooding and he had a youthfulness about the choices he was making and sort of his thoughtlessness and his irritation with being sought by Elle, his gloating victory, his fast descent into an abuse of this newfound power. He also sounded just sensational. It was a wonderful vocal, soaring, powerful, everything you'd want it to be. Like I mentioned before, he became less and less likable as a protagonist, but I think that has a lot to do with the way that his character is written. They don't offer us a lot of reasons to root for him, especially towards the end of the show, but maybe that's the point of Death Note. I don't know, weigh in the comments. Adam Pascal played Ryuk, the Shinigami. Now, he's not going to be reprising his role for the Lyric Theatre production. The wonderful George Maguire will be playing that character there, but Adam was fantastic. Obviously, vocally, rocky and gravelly and great, but he was so whimsical, and having always played sort of the brooding, serious man, I don't know if he's ever really had the chance to play such a playful, demonic character before, but I loved him. Ryuk was great, and it was telling that I wanted more and more from him. He was so effortlessly funny. I loved his physicality, the way he would sort of hunch and watch over things and sort of linger as this malevolent, maniacal presence. Rem, the other Shinigami, meanwhile, was played by Aimie Atkinson, who has the kind of voice for which Frank Wildhorn is surely writing. She reminds me so much vocally of the brilliant Linda Eder, who was the original Lucy in Jekyll and Hyde, one of my favourite vocalists of all time. I love the amount of air that Aimie can inject into a vocal performance. It makes it sound so passionate and wrought. And she was playing quite a different kind of a character. Hers was less playful and less gleefully wicked. She was much more ethereal and caring and feeling. Again, you had a very sharp divide between the male and female attributes of these characters. But I thought she was a great presence and gave show-stopping vocals, as you would expect from Aimie Atkinson. She's a star. Frances Mayli McCann played Misa. This was a really fun performance from her. I mean, her Bonnie in Bonnie and Clyde was so sensational. This was a little more light-hearted. She was charming, completely believable as a Japanese pop star. She put across those performances really well. Again, she is not going to be appearing at the Lyric Theatre production. The wonderful Jessica Lee from the recent revival of Miss Saigon in Sheffield is going to be playing Misa at the Lyric. But the stand-up performance of the whole thing for me was Dean John Wilson as Elle. He has such an interesting character. And he characterized it with charm and with arrogance. You felt and believed the weight of his presence whenever he was in a scene. He had such an air of control. He was so commanding, but then was also so childlike and so playful and so funny when he's eating sweets and talking about how he can't sit properly in chairs. All the makings of a fan favorite character, and probably amidst a lot of exceptional vocalists, gave the best vocal performance. It was phenomenally good. Soaring high notes, beautiful fluid riffing. It was delicious. And the highlight of the whole thing was him facing off against Joaquin Pedro Valdes. They were so perfectly matched to each other. That became the real focus of the show, and with that casting it made it clear that it was about the face-off between these two characters and the power struggle between them. But those have been my thoughts on Death Note the musical. I promised at the beginning I would talk about the longevity of this show. I think it's already proved very, very popular with audiences. Clearly it can sell. It's going to have a short run at the Lyric Theatre in London. It's already done very well in Japan previously. I wouldn't be surprised if a full West End run is on the horizon. I think this show could go to Broadway as well. This market and these fans are often underestimated, but I think producers are being surprised at just how commercially viable a show like this can be. So I, for one, would really welcome Death Note in a full major production in the West End or on Broadway. For now, we will have to wait and see, but thank you for watching today's review video. I hope you have enjoyed. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my theatre-themed YouTube channel for many more reviews coming very soon. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm MickeyJoTheatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!